All right. Well, good afternoon. Apologize for the delay. We were waiting to see if we could get Wade Brewer logged in. We had a little technical glitch where the invitation had not gone out to him. And so I've resent that, but I'm not sure if he's able to get in. So we're going to go ahead and get started. If he comes in, he'll pop up on the screen alongside of me. But if not, we'll get through this. But we appreciate you guys jumping on the call with us today. We really just want to talk about the safeguards rule and the fact that, hey, it's 2025. The deadline of December 23 has come and gone, and it's and now what is kind of the question. I wanted to give you guys a little bit of a background from a cybersecurity regulation standpoint. Obviously, HIPAA Security Rule was one of the first ones out there that, was back in the mid 90s. But it went into effect, really truly effect, meaning they were enforcing it in about 2009, 2010. And so that really kicked in. And then next in line was the, National Association of Insurance Companies, the NAIC, created their model law. And insurance is regulated at a state level. So that was created as a model that states could use to pass their own laws individually. So over the years, the past few years, states have been passing their own laws, most of which have been almost an exact duplicate of that model law. And by the way, that model law was very much created based on the framework of HIPAA security. In fact, you'll hear the terms administrative, technical, and physical quite often because that comes straight out of that HIPAA security rule. And there again, they use that as the basis. And then third, but last but not least, right, is the FTC Safeguards Rule, which is what we're talking about today. That came out in December of 23, or it went into effect in 23. And there again was built very much off of that HIPAA security rule. So when we talk about this today, we're going to talk about some similarities. And I also kind of talk about all of them together. We serve clients in all these industries. And when you see new things come down the pipeline, so for instance, HIPAA security rule just released their proposed new rule in December of 24. You begin to see how they're all kind of tied together. So some of the things that are explicitly called out in the FTC safeguards rules were not explicitly called out in the HIPAA security rule. And that was just because of the fact that that rule was really updated back in 09. I think they made another update to it 2012, 2014. But obviously, 10 years plus had gone by. So some of the things that were in the FTC safeguards rule were not explicit, and now they're bringing that one up to speed. And I think what you're also going to see is I think there's some new things that they're pulling in that HIPAA rule that I think you're going to see in the next revision of this safeguards rule. They're continuing to tweak. So we'll go through that, but that just want to give you a history there. And so then we'll move into some of these. The other thing is, okay, well, where are we, right? So 2023 deadline for the safeguards rule came and went. And you may be sitting there thinking, well, hey, the world didn't stop, it didn't collapse, didn't come to an end. I haven't done anything yet. The reality is that things are not getting better in the world of cybersecurity. They're getting worse. And I know that's not a surprise to you guys, but it's worth saying, it's worth repeating. We're constantly having attacks. And specifically from an automotive standpoint, the automotive industry is getting attacked more. I think the attackers are realizing the depth of the information that you guys have in your client bases. And so it has become enticing to them. So this slide, there's a couple of them here. You'll get the slide deck, so I'm not going to read all these, but this is one just talking about that there's a surge for 2025 in the attackers in the auto industry. Another thing that we're seeing a surge in is vishing, which is a voice version of phishing. We're still certainly seeing the phishing attacks. One of the largest entryways to a hack is through email phishing. But what we're also beginning to see are these voice versions. So it's all about getting credentials. And then once you've got those credentials, utilizing those credentials to breach a system. I will be honest with you, sometimes the way this industry works, and when I say this industry, meaning the hacker industry, you have companies groups that their job is to get the credentials and then they sell the credentials and that's all that they do. Then you have companies or groups that take those credentials they've purchased and then they do the harm with them. That's where they create the hack, they grab the data, they induce the ransomware, and so on and so forth. So these are things, if you notice, the last 6 months of 2024 really jumped when it came to vishing. And then another thing that, and we're going to talk a little bit about because it's part of the FTC Safeguards Rule, is the end of life, number one, but then also the software as a service applications. These are a couple of concerns as we're looking forward into risks and areas that we really need to nail down. End of life software, that's one of those things when we talk about vulnerability scanning, that's something that you've got to really think about. If there's something on your network that is end of life, meaning it's a, an old printer from 10 years ago that they don't support anymore, but it's got an IP address and it's on your network, that is a risk and that is a potential way in for a hacker. What I will say is when you look at the new HIPAA security rule, that is one of the proposed rule. That is one of the things that they have called out, is that they are basically saying you can't have, and this is in the healthcare industry, you can't have unsupported devices on your network. And this is exactly why. So when we work with a client and we go through and do a scan of their network, we're scanning everything. We're not just scanning computers. We're scanning anything that's got an IP address that's scannable, because we want to identify. It could be an IP address camera. It could be a printer. It could be a voice over IP phone that's end of life that needs to be considered of, hey, what's the risk there for me as an entity? And then, of course, the other thing is the software as a service applications are definitely a concern. What we see, and we do a lot of different kind of work in this area. We see a lot of folks that have third parties and they have software as a service outsourced, and they either get a SOC report from them and rely, oh, well, they gave me a SOC report, or they don't get anything and they just rely on the fact that the software company is big enough, it's under control. It can't just stop there. You can't just say, oh, well, they have a SOC report. You've really got to look at it in more detail. You've got to look at what's included in that SOC report. And we're going to dig into that in a little bit. But those are a couple of areas that are, on the rise, if you will. And then finally, this is talking about automotive industry specifically. The number of bad actors has quadrupled. And so it's really moving in the wrong direction. There again, pretty much all the industries are moving in the wrong direction, and so it's an uphill battle, but we've got to keep fighting that battle. Okay, so in general, the other thing I wanted to bring to everybody's attention is when we talk about cyber insurance policies, you need to be really careful. If you have a cybersecurity insurance policy, and that is your parachute, if you will. You really need to look at the details of that, because if you're not doing what you should be doing to comply with federal regulations, there's very likely a clause in that insurance policy that says, hey, if you're not in compliance with federal regulations, then it doesn't pay, or it pays a much reduced out. So that's something that you really need to consider. I know that you guys, when you do get that insurance policy, you've got a questionnaire. Those questionnaires from the insurance companies have gotten much more detailed. They cover a lot more. And to be quite honest with you, they were asking for some things. They were asking for MFA before MFA was actually in the regulations in the healthcare world. And so those are some things to think about is, hey, look, if I'm not meeting federal regulations, is that insurance policy actually going to pay, or am I just wasting my money on premiums? The other thing that we need to think about is, if we're not in compliance with the regulations, what's the impact on us? I say us. What's the impact on the entity if they did have a breach, and the impact from a civil lawsuit standpoint and from a federal fines and penalty standpoint? In the healthcare world, If you are not in compliance and it's clear that you're not in compliance, you're not even doing the basics, you pretty much get taken into another tier of penalties that are about 4 times the normal fines and penalties. I don't know the numbers on civil lawsuits, but I have to believe that those numbers are higher when a business is clearly not compliant with the regulation. So the bottom line is we want to get and we want all of you guys to find an answer so that you can be compliant with that regulation in a way that doesn't break the bank, right? That's a way that helps you, that gets you there, helps you move forward, and protects you. Not only protects your data, your client's data, but protects you in the event of a breach from fines and penalties and crazy amounts of civil lawsuit monies. I don't know if you guys have seen Smokey and the Bandit, but that's one of my favorite movies of all time. And my son and I can pretty much quote the scene, well, not just the scene, but the movie. So we always get a kick out of when they approach the young gentlemen that are basically stripping the car. And he says that was an attention getter. And so the bottom line is when we're talking about all the negative things that are going on and how cybersecurity is increasing, cybersecurity attacks are increasing. It really is meant for us to kind of wake up and go, wait a minute, this is serious business, and we've got to take it seriously. So here is a recipe, if you will. So these are the key points that I want to hit from the Safeguards Rule. The Safeguards Rule is actually, if you're looking at the regulation itself, and by the way, I have the regulation that I'll put out there as a resource. So when this is done, you guys will have the ability to grab the PowerPoint and this, what is an annotated regulation document. So it's the actual regulation. I've gone in and put some highlights, and you'll notice when we go through this, I've called out, section G and H and this, that, and the other. You'll see that in the annotated regulation. But the good news about it is it's a 12-page regulation. And if I'm not mistaken, really the core of this is about 3 pages long. There's a section in the beginning that's definitions, but the elements section is very short. And that's a kind offering since the new proposed rule in HIPAA is 125 pages. Very happy that it's not too terribly long. So it's something that's digestible. It's something that I believe that if you take this PowerPoint and you look at the annotated regulation, it will make more sense. And that's really the ultimate goal. So we're going to talk about the written information security program. We're going to talk about the security risk assessment. We're going to talk about implementing those and testing the safeguards. We're going to talk about user access review, all the basics, encryption, multi-factor, monitoring the user activity, the annual pen test. And again, every one of these is straight out of the regulation. The biannual vulnerability assessment, security awareness training, risk mitigation plan. And then last but not least, the two assessing third-party providers, which I kind of alluded to a little bit earlier. And then finally, the incident response plan. There again, if I have another presentation for HIPAA, it's the formula here is almost identical. It's amazing. All of these are the key ingredients for this, what I call a recipe. And so, I pulled up this picture here. If you think about baking a cake, you've got, core ingredients, right? You've got flour, eggs, probably some oil of some sort, and this, that, and the other. In and of themselves, they're not a cake. So the bowl of flour before you do anything with it is not a cake. It's just flour. You've got to bring all those ingredients together to create that cake. And, I pulled in the picture of the pizza as well. We like to do I guess not brick oven, but, the grilled pizza. And, tomato sauce alone is not a pizza. It's got to come together. And that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about the safeguards rule and we're talking about cybersecurity. You can't just pick and choose and go, okay, well, yeah, well, we do that. That's not the full picture. So when we look at these things, I'm hoping that this information is helpful to you guys so that you can assess where you are currently. You guys may have third-party IT providers that are saying, hey, yeah, we take care of that. I want to give you the knowledge and the information so that you can question that to make sure that you're in the right place. One thing I will say is that across industries, this is not just automobile industry or auto dealer industry, but across industries, healthcare and insurance, we run into a lot of third-party providers that do a great job of maintaining systems. Kind of a break fix, right? They're doing a great job of keeping you up and running. Where there tends to be a problem is some of those are not making that turn into more of a security minded, a compliance minded mindset. And that's where we're seeing some of the problems occurring. We're seeing some clients saying, oh, yeah, my third party said that we're good. They take care of that. And when you really start to peel back the layers and look beneath the surface, they really aren't. And so what I want you guys to have is the information that you need to really make sure that you are where you need to be. So that recipe is critical. So when we go into this, I've obviously made multiple comments related to HIPAA Security Rule. This is from 2009 from the HIPAA Security series. And all I want you to see here is, hey, there's that number 2 is the administrative, number 3, physical safeguards, 4, technical safeguards. Look at number 5, talking about policies and procedures. And then finally, the risk analysis and risk management. That's the risk assessment. As you can see, all of those are very familiar terms, right? It's exactly what you're seeing in the FTC Safeguards Rule. All right, so let's jump into the written information security program. So this one is, I think, can be confusing, but the bottom line is that if you put all this together from a recipe standpoint, the way we approach this is you're required to have written policies and procedures. And if you take the risk assessment approach that they're really laying out, all of it together creates an information security program. And it also creates a written information security program. So all of the policies, the procedures lay out, hey, here's what our policy is. Here are the controls, the procedures that we're have in place, that we've documented in writing that we have in place. And then as we go through the assessment, we're testing that. And so you're going to see this big circle of everything coming together to build the cake, if you will. But let's talk a little bit about those written information security program. This one comes out of standard. It says you shall develop, implement, and maintain a comprehensive information security program that is in written. Some of these fun things I kind of smile a little bit about because as I just finished the PowerPoint and webinar for healthcare, in writing and written is used in that new proposed rule. Like I don't have the count on this one because it wasn't the focus, but I mean, it is an enormous amount of times that they use the word written. And so there's some key words that they really just hammered home in that new proposed regulation. But there again, you're seeing the administrative, technical, and physical. So as you can imagine, as we take this approach in all of these industries, that core set of safeguards, the administrative, technical, and physical, is really where our focus is. So when we get to the risk assessment section of this, and I talk a little bit about that, I'll share with you the approach that we take, but I'll also share with you how we kind of come back to the HIPAA security rule from a coverage standpoint. All right, so we've talked about that program. The implement, the key word here is it says you shall develop, implement, and maintain. I've had folks that have not argued the point, but have questioned, well, wait a minute, I have implemented policies there. I've written them. They're physically right here, but yet they don't have any of the controls in place that are in those policies. When they say implemented, they mean if you have come up with a policy and a procedure, implemented means not that you've just written it, but it means that those controls that you call out, the things that you say you're going to do, that you actually do them. The new HIPAA security rule went to the level of defining the word implement. And it said it actually defined it as it must be in place, be in effect, and function as expected. And so, by the way, all of these things that I'm pointing out that came out in the HIPAA security rule, I tried to make them blue. I think I did try to do that as like that kind of common thread, so you'll see that. But when you read that 125 page, well, you guys won't read the 125 page document for HIPAA, but when I did, they explained, they being the HHS, which is the Health and Human Services, they explained where this came from. So they explained their experience in their audits and experience as they requested information from healthcare entities. And then that led to this proposed rule. And what their experience was kind of similar to what I was just sharing. And people coming back with, well, yeah, we haven't implemented. I've had a client say to me, hey, we've got a policy. I was like, great, this is good news. Let me take a look at it. Well, I mean, we have a policy, but I don't have it written down. Having a policy in your head doesn't do you any good, right? It may guide you, but it's not something that's audit withstanding. It's not something it's not what is being required of you. So they've defined some of those words. I think you're going to see some of that same stuff, those same clarifications come through in a later date for the FTC Safeguards Rule. I think things like that are probably going to surface in the future for FTC. All right, and then the final thing there, I just hit that. Truly means written, and I did bring it in here. Written was used 225 times in that 125-page HIPAA security proposed rule. So they really hammered that home that it needed to be in writing. And then we already talked about the administrative, technical, and physical. The thing I will point out is when we talk about safeguards, you're going to hear like three different terms: safeguards, controls, and security measures. All of those are the same thing. That means that there is a control in place, and I lean towards the word control because that's my background. That's what I do. A security measure, they all mean the same thing. It's something that you've put in place. Gosh, think about a password. That's a control. Having a 15-character password, complexity enabled, that is a control or a security measure or a safeguard. Those are the things that they're looking for. And as we go through this, they're looking for you guys to have fundamental controls in place to protect those the data of your clients. All right, so we talked about this. The one thing I'll say is it does not limit as much as you think in that final sentence where it says appropriate to your size and complexity and nature of scope. Regardless of your size, there are controls and security measures that are applicable to your organization. And I think of our entity because we're a very small company, and we have multi-factor on each one of the softwares that we utilize. We have encryption on each one of the softwares. We have security awareness training. There are things that are very much scalable. So each of those that I just called out are not things that break the bank for us as a small entity. And so I know that a lot of the folks on the call are small dealers, and your knee jerk is, well, I can't afford all this. A lot of the software, majority of the software has the capability, and it's just a matter of setting that configuration so that you've got that. Now, for instance, we're on a Windows 11 Pro. 11 Pro encryption BitLocker is standard with that. I think it started being standard around, gosh, I can't remember. It's been a couple of versions back. Before that, it was more of a problem. Having encryption on your laptop, that was something that you had to get a third party for. But now it's part of the course operating system for you. So there are things like that that are simple, that are in essence free. It's part of what you're already paying for. So those are some of the things that we want to look at and realize that, wait a minute, this is something that even a small entity can make changes and make updates so that they increase their security. All right, security risk assessment. This is a good one. This is the one, obviously a big one. It's the core. It's the nucleus of everything when we talk about this recipe. And it's something that, yeah, I was wondering if I brought it into the very next slide. If you'll notice, I know wagon wheels are a little outdated, right? Nobody's riding around on a wagon, but there's such a great illustration. And if you look at this wagon wheel, the hub is as I made the comment, kind of the nucleus, and that hub is the risk assessment. Everything else are the spokes going around that in the system, and the hub is core. And you can't if you're talking about having a security recipe to meet the compliance, to meet the regulations, you can't do it without the risk assessment. I made the comment that if you're missing a spoke on this wagon wheel, sure, it could be weaker. There could be some potential problems. It may not ride as smoothly at high speeds in a wagon, right? But it still could function. And so, my point is you can have a security risk assessment and have that hub and identify, hey, wait a minute, I've got some weaknesses. I've got some weak spokes out there, and it still function as you're working to strengthen those spokes. If you don't have that hub, it's not going to function. You're not going to be compliant. And so that's one of the biggest things to walk away with today. Now, I know we're going to dig into some more detail, but gosh, if there's only one thing that you walk away with, that's the key. So here's the recipe, a sub recipe, if you will, for the risk assessment. Now, this came straight out of HIPAA, but the reason why I pull this in is because HIPAA's federal, and so is FTC. They're both the federal government. They both come from the CFR, which is the Federal Registry. So this is coming from the same source, and they being the federal government, has gone to great lengths to explain risk assessment, risk analysis. They've given a tremendous amount of free tools out there on how to conduct it. And in fact, in that new proposed rule, they kind of called it out. They said, even after we've made all this available, there was such a small percentage of hospitals that were conducting a risk assessment like it should be done, that they got really granular with the layout of this risk assessment in the regulation itself. Now, in FTC Safeguards Rule, they don't get as granular, I believe, because they believe that they've already said it, right? So here's that recipe, and I like it. It's a clean cut one. First of all, you've got review technology asset inventory. Obviously, you can't protect what you don't know that you have, and so that asset inventory is huge. Identify the threats, and that is looking at, hey, wait a minute, what are the things coming at me? Everything from data flows to say, these are all the things that you would do in the risk assessment, is to look at, okay, where does my data flow so that I can identify where are my potential threats to that data, identify the potential vulnerabilities. I put vulnerabilities in italics because of the fact that that's another term that for quite a while I thought was a universal term. If I said vulnerability scans, that anybody in IT would know, could relate exactly to what I was talking about. What I've realized is that specifically with some of the third-party IT groups that are more of a break fix, and again, I don't say that in a negative way for them, because they do a great job of keeping things up and running, and they've served clients well. But a lot of times they're not as security compliance minded, and vulnerability scanning is a very specific thing, and we're going to dig into that. And so that's why I highlighted it here, because there is a definition for that. It's not just any old, report that you get that says, hey, there's a couple things on your network that, don't look good. Create the assessment with security measures. And those security measures are the controls. So this is not just okay, what bad thing could happen? Well, we could have a phishing email attack. How big of a risk is that? Well, it's pretty high risk. It's not just taking these really high level pervasive issues and saying, okay, well, let's associate a risk to that. Let's come up with a plan of action at a high level. This is talking about getting down into the weeds and looking at a control level, blocking and tackling to support all of that. And so that's where the NIST cybersecurity framework has come into place. That is one of the most commonly used frameworks for risk assessments. It's very common in the healthcare industry. But one of the things that we've realized is that it goes beyond the HIPAA security rule from a coverage standpoint. And so what we're intending to do for the auto industry is we're going to use that cybersecurity framework as our framework for the assessment, because it's the most commonly used and it's what the federal auditors, the language they speak. So we're going to utilize that, but we're also going to pare that back just a bit so that things that go outside of that HIPAA security rule, again, I know that's not FTC, but it is the basis. So when they go outside of that safeguards rule, we're going to pare back down to that, so that we're really measuring on the core that is in this FTC Safeguards Rule. What that will do for us is it will trim that approach down a bit. And again, we're trying to find ways to do it right, but to do it in the most efficient way for the least amount of money, because we know there's a lot of small dealers out there that are looking at this going, there's no way we can do this. And so we're trying to make a way to do it right. And that's the other thing, is you're not going to see from us here's all the answer to all your problems, for this, 1999 kind of thing. It's not going to be like that, because the reality is you can't do what's required of you for that little money. What you're really typically going to end up with is a false sense of security. If you do something that's kind of half-ended and it really doesn't meet the regulation, you may feel a little better about it, but if you have a breach and you get audited, it's not going to hold up. And then the reality is all that money and effort spent would be wasted. And so that's not what I want for our client base. I don't ever want my client to feel like they've worked with us for years, and then when something bad happens, that they look back and go, wow, that was such a waste of our time and money. One great example of that is we have a client in Georgia in the healthcare that had a breach in 2021. We supported them at no additional cost under a federal breach audit. That comes from the Office of Civil Rights in their world. It would be FTC for you guys, but no additional costs, supported them. That audit lasted 3 years. Things drag on with those kind of audits. It's not a day-to-day kind of thing, but it's, you get notification, you have 30 days to respond, and it's back and forth. Last page of that book, 0 fines and penalties for that client. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say that client did not look back on the relationship with us and say, wow, we wasted our money. I don't think it's much of a limb, since we still serve them. I think that would have been probably the first thing to go, would be our relationship, if that's how they felt. But anyway, regardless of who you guys utilize for this, that's where I want you to be. I want you to be in a position where you're doing the right thing. And you can sleep well at night, knowing that, hey, if something bad happens, I've done everything that I'm supposed to do. Continuing on with this recipe, we talk about likelihood and impact. Really what you're doing is those are key terms that they're looking for. They're looking for you to say, okay, if this bad thing happened, first of all, what's the likelihood of that happening, right? What's the impact if it did happen? So for instance, a phishing attack, the likelihood's pretty high, and the impact is excessive, right? There are other risks out there that maybe the likelihood's fairly low and the impact is moderate. That's what they're wanting you to do, is go through that process of thinking through that. And what we did for our client base is we've created a baseline of these risks with impact and likelihood, and we call that the inherent risk rating. So that we basically said, hey, look, for each one of these controls that we're trying to test, what's the bad thing that could happen there? And we've created that baseline of a risk. And then as our clients improve and score better on the controls related to those, then that reduces that residual risk related to that. So for instance, in the example of phishing simulations, or excuse me, a phishing attack, we made the comment that, hey, the high likelihood and excessive impact, if a client comes to us and we're doing the risk assessment and they say, hey, look, we're doing phishing simulations, on an ongoing basis. We have training, 2 or 3 times a year with our staff to make sure, all of our employees, to make sure they understand that this is a really high risk. They understand the data that we're trying to protect, on and on. And they score really well on that. What's going to happen is it's going to drop that residual risk rating down on that one. So that's the whole goal, is to take the higher risks and go, okay, how can I whittle those down? How can I reduce that risk? So we talked about the risk level of each threat. I pretty much just covered that. And the risks posed by business associates, we're going to hit that. That is one that is in your regulation. It was called out explicitly. And then in the new HIPAA Security Rule, proposed rule, they really got granular. It was already there, but it wasn't there to the extent that it was in FTC, and they just went a whole nother level. And I think you're going to see that same level come for FTC in the future updates. But it's yours is already written pretty strictly, so we're going to cover that in just here in a minute. All right, so let's see. Let me just check and see. Yeah, Mr. Brewer came in. Wait, are you on the screen with us? Not hearing Wade. Let me see. Move to webinar. Bear with me a second. Let's see if I can get Wade in here with us. I don't think I just saw Wade coming. He's on mute. Let's see if we can get him to unmute. Right. I just asked Wade if he want to unmute. If we see him pop in, I'll introduce Wade to you. And again, my apologies for the technical problem that we had having Wade join us to begin with. But anyway, we'll hit this talking about the high level risk analysis. We talked for just a few minutes ago on that last slide. We talked about the inherent risk rating. This just describes it in detail. I'm not going to read this slide to you. Again, you'll have this and you'll have it to be able to look back at from a kind of a definition standpoint. So I think we've covered the risk, inherent risk and the residual risk there. All right, the detailed risk assessment based on commonly accepted framework, and I mentioned the NIST cybersecurity framework. And in the blue, I tried to keep it where every time I do blue, you know that's coming from the HIPAA new proposed HIPAA security rule. 160 times they mentioned NIST in this new proposed rule. It certainly was not in the original. And I believe they mentioned cybersecurity framework 25 times. So it is a really big push to get folks to utilize that framework, in my opinion. Now, just so you guys know, the 853 was kind of the flagship, and that cybersecurity was a subset that came out of that quite a few years ago. And that's all on this slide in the details, so you'll have that here. But just so you know where that came from, and like I said, there are some things in that cybersecurity framework that we get for a small auto dealer, or hey, that doesn't apply. And so we're trying to tailor that down in our process to make sure that we're not honestly frustrating our clients with going through things that truly don't apply to them. All right, the risk assessment should be conducted annually. The tests that controls are in place and operating effectively to reduce the risks. The annually is a big deal. So yours being the FTC Safeguard Rules already says annually. HIPAA Security originally said periodically. I always said they say periodically, but I know what they mean, and that's every 12 months. In the new proposed rule, it says every 12 months. There again, that's another item that they repeated so many times in that regulation. So again, that risk assessment is something that's happening every year. And think of it this way, you're really basically, it is you getting your game plan for, okay, what do the risks look like now? So we took a measure of the risk a year ago, and we identified what our prioritization should be to attack those risks and to say, okay, here's our highest risk. Let's work on those first. But I'll be honest with you, things change every year. So you've made some improvements in some of these areas, but then there's been some steps back on areas because of the new risks that have developed. So it's important that you're looking at that every year to say, not only to meet the regulation, but to say, okay, what's my new prioritization list? Okay, what do I need to work on? Because what if you just kept working the same list, you could be working an item that is 15 rungs down on the list compared to the latest, highest vulnerability and latest and highest risk item that has now emerged. And that really needs your focus. If you're not doing the risk assessments on an annual basis, you're not seeing that. That's why they're forcing the hand of that being done every 12 months. In fact, in HIPAA, it's at least every 12 months. If you make literally a change to the systems, you're supposed to do another risk assessment. So the risk assessment from a frequency standpoint is really important. I just put a note in here, and I think you've probably heard enough already that this is not really a question, but this shouldn't be a checklist approach. There are softwares out there that you can conduct a risk assessment, and you're literally just going through it and you're just saying, yes, we have passwords. Yes, we do backups. Yes, we do this. That checklist approach is not going to do anything in an audit. So if you have a breach and the federal auditors say, we want to see your risk assessment, if all you can do is print out a checklist that said you just checked it off, it's not going to bode well. In the audits that we've supported, if I showed that a risk were reduced, like for instance, the phishing simulations, and I said, you know what, we reduced that risk from excessive or high down to moderate or low, and that's the residual. That auditor will ask, how did you come to that conclusion? Which means, show me how you came to that conclusion. I want to see something. No auditor is just going to go, oh, okay, well, good news. You reduced that risk. It's not the way auditors work. And so that's the important part. And the reality is, I don't want to paint the auditors as, as such villains, because they truly aren't. The whole purpose in an audit, and I know this is coming from an auditor, right? So, the fact that I don't want to paint us as villains, the point is that when you audit something and you verify that it's happening, it truly does happen. If no one's measuring it and it's just as simple as a checklist and there's no evidence that it's really happening, there's multiple things that can happen. One of the easiest is that it cannot be working and you don't realize it. And so it can fall through the cracks. It could be a good intention that you plan to do that, but you hadn't put it in place yet. So there's a lot of things that come into play that really drive this, but it really shouldn't be a checklist for your own sake. All right, so we talk about the risk assessment. I am trying to do a better job of looking at questions or chats, and I don't see any at the moment. So hopefully, if you have a question and you do a hand raise or you put a chat up, I'll see that. I haven't seen any so far, so forgive me if I do miss it because of the fact that I'm not the strongest at webinars. We're a little new to the webinar scene. So anyway, we'll jump into implement and regularly test the safeguards. So let's talk about that. Again, when we talk about that cybersecurity framework as your basis, partnered up with that HIPAA security rule. By the way, that cybersecurity framework maps directly to the HIPAA security rule. So what is it made up of? It's made up of controls in each of these core areas. So things like user access review, that's a control. That's a security measure, a safeguard. Encryption, multi-factor. These are all controls that they're looking for you to have in place. And what they're saying is not only do we want you to have a written information security program, written policies and procedures, we want you to test them. Now, this is something that's got more explicit in the HIPAA security rule. We had already interpreted that. We'd already read between the lines, 15 years ago when HIPAA security, the enforcement came out. And the bottom line is that you can't speak to this unless you test those controls. You test it at the control level. They're calling it out explicitly here. So that's what that requirement. And by the way, I mentioned it earlier and I haven't said anything else about it, but each one of these, you'll notice it has the actual code section number of part, 314.4C and D-1. When you get the annotated regulations, you'll see if you go to those, they're very easy to follow, and you'll see where I've highlighted and underlined what I'm calling out. Now, are there other things in that regulation? Sure. You need to familiarize yourself with all of it. And again, the good news is it's not very long. But what I've done is I've really pulled out the highlights and the core takeaways, in my opinion, of course, that relate to me, right? That relate to the work that we do. There are other things that are in there that you may go, wow, we got to look at this, and it's not in my field. So those are things to keep in mind. So we talked about the regularly testing. Let's just jump right on in. Audit withstanding, I think you guys have gotten that point as we've talked through this. And then the regularly test, it's just breaking it down, the actual code section down there. So this is just an example of a dashboard for the cybersecurity framework for, out of the software that we utilize to do our assessments. And what it does is it takes each one of the categories. So IDAM is the very first category in cybersecurity framework. This is version 1.1, by the way. There is a version 2.0 where they tweaked the organization of it just a little bit. And so this basically shows, okay, the overall score. Now, there are sub-controls that make up that asset management, and I'm not sure if I brought that in. I did not. So each of those would have multiple controls that support that and that would have been graded. This is just a visual out of our software of what I've described earlier being the inherent risk rating. So if you look at the colored map on the left, that is the inherent risk map, meaning if you didn't do anything, these are the risks, the inherent risks that are out there that we've created a baseline of. And then the residual risk map would be, and this is for a client who's doing very well, by the way. If you'll notice, quite a few of those are down into the green at this point, and they are scoring very high. They've been doing this for a while. Not honestly for a small auto dealer, not something I would expect to see right out of the gate, right? Because you guys, this is all new to you. There's a lot of this that you're not doing. But that residual risk map shows you, hey, here's where we are now after the controls that we've put in place, we've tested, and we've said, hey, we're doing a good job on these controls. So this is just the idea here. If you'll look in the top left corner of that, there's 108 total risks. Once again, we chose to go kind of in a backwards direction and say, if we're going to look at 108 controls, there should be a risk associated, or why would we even talk about it? So that's where that 108 comes from. Just to give you a quick look at that. I looked down at my watch just to see how we're doing on time. We are running pretty tight. We've got a few more of these to go. When we talk about user access review, we talk about encryption, multi-factor. If you look, every one of those is a control. As I talked about before, encryption, multi-factor, those are things that most of the softwares that you use probably have as an option at this point. It's a matter of enabling that and getting used to the inconvenience of it, right? There is some inconvenience, and sometimes it's a little irritating, but we have the criminals to thank for that. The user access review, you're trying to see that folks, you're literally, it's a audit of user activity to see if users or if a user, and it's not about the person, it's about their credentials, is accessing something that's not normal during a time that's not normal, a volume that's not normal. This is a great example of something that, as a very small entity, we can do. On our cloud-based file server, we have automated review of that activity. So what I've done is I've set parameters that if one of our users downloads a certain amount, accesses a certain amount, any of those things, it will bring it to our attention and say, hey, there's been suspected activity. And then as a team, we send that out to the team and say, okay, hey, whose user is this? Does this look normal? Let's just make sure this is actually them, that kind of thing. That is something that is manageable for a very small entity. If you look at it on its surface, you may, be overwhelmed and think, oh, wow, this is, how in the world are we supposed to do this? We want to make as much of this possible as light administratively as possible, meaning we don't want it to be a burden administratively. So for instance, that is not a burden to me. I get those emails. I don't get them that frequently, but when I get them, we take just a minute to have that exchange amongst our team. And it's typically very quick that we recognize, oh, that's Jim. Yes, he's downloading the files, getting ready for this year's audit. Yeah, I knew he was doing that. I talked to him today. Okay, done. So that's the kind of thing we're looking for. Anyway, so we talk about that, those specific controls. So the annual pen test, I will tell you that pen testing is something that you can spend a tremendous amount of money on. And we came through with a pen test solution before FTC Safeguards to help the insurance industry, because that was the first regulation it was called out in. And like everything that we do, we tried to come up with a solution that met the requirement, but that was at a cost that was reasonable. It was something that we could lower the cost across our client base. So if you're for pen testing, look at that. You may get some crazy numbers out there. It's just a very wide range of pricing as we've seen it. The vulnerability assessments, this is one where make sure that it's truly vulnerability assessments. Let me see if I move into, yes. This is right out of the regulation where it's talking about pen testing and vulnerability assessments. And I believe in my next slide, I talk about vulnerability. Yes, I do. Thank you. Thank you. I didn't want to talk about it until I got to the slide, but vulnerability scanning is very specific, as I mentioned very early on in the conversation. It's based on CVEs, or common vulnerabilities and exposures. There's literally a national database that is maintained. The CISA.org, which is the Information Security Agency, I subscribe to them, and I get emails basically saying, hey, there's been a new CVE added. Does that mean I need to do anything immediately? Not necessarily. What it means is that the vulnerability scanning key player companies like a Qualys, a Rapid7, an Nessus, they're adding that to their bank, their profile, so that when they run the scan, they can look for that. So that CVE, that vulnerability, what it is when it's recognized that there is a weakness within the hardware or the software or the settings, it's added to that database. And then these scanning tools, their mission is to go out and find that and say, hey, wait a minute, you've got a machine that's got this weakness, this vulnerability that we've established. And here's how to close that. Here's how to fix that. So we utilize Qualys when we do our scanning. That software gives you literally the what to do to fix it. And if it's a patch that you're missing, it will literally have, and it's in the report, in the solution. And obviously this is a more detailed portion of the report, but it will say, hey, you need to go to Microsoft, download this patch. This is what you need to do. We chose to give everything to our clients so that they can, maybe they have their own in-house IT person, maybe they have a third party, maybe they have a consultant. However they want to do it, we want to give them all that information so that they can utilize that regardless of the resource they're using, and so that it moves them closer to the answer. So we talk about the patching, the blocking and tackling. The key is I've seen a lot of third parties that will say, oh yeah, we do vulnerability scanning. And when you look at the report, it's really more of a network report, a report just showing what's on the network. It might show that there are laptops that may have a few that need patches. That's certainly good information, but it's not a full-blown vulnerability scan, which is what's being required of you. So utilize this and the CVEs. Look for CVEs. If it doesn't talk about a CVE somewhere, it's likely not a vulnerability scan. So again, hoping this gives you tools to work towards that. Okay, so we've got mitigation, and then the pen testing every 12 months. The mitigation is the bottom line is running that scan and doing nothing about it. Really, honestly, running any kind of report and then doing nothing about it doesn't do you any good. And so the regulations are wanting to see that, just as are the controls that we try to put in place, that you're doing something about it, that you take that report, you analyze it, and you mitigate it. And that mitigation, once again, would be, okay, what's my highest priority? What's my highest risk? And the vulnerability softwares that are out there will certainly put them in a risk rating order for you. All right, still don't see any questions, so that's good news. Let's see. So we're talking about security awareness training. We're right up on our time here. I'm gonna punch through that because I talked about it earlier. One of the quickest ways to do that is through phishing simulations. There's training out there available. Making sure your people understand that, hey, and that's honestly the biggest thing is people don't really realize the target that they are. They don't think they're important enough, right? Hey, I'm just an office admin. I'm just a manager here. I'm just a this. it's about the fact that they have credentials that can get into data on the network. So they're definitely at risk. All right, let's jump into risk mitigation plan. I'm going to blow right through that. Risk mitigation plan. This is a critical piece to the overall recipe, and it's called out in the FTC Safeguards Rule. Gave you the section there. The bottom line is when we talk about this entire information security program, we talk about testing the controls, we talk about coming up with those risks. The next step is to say, what am I going to do about it? And this risk mitigation plan is literally your plan where you've said, okay, here's my highest priority based on the highest risk rating. All right, what am I going to do? Some of these may be I can't because of budget issues. It's going to be, 2027 before I can make a change on this because of this other software that I'm dependent upon that would not work if I make this change. There's all kinds of solution or combinations of reasons there. So that mitigation plan is extremely important. That is one of the things that we is a deliverable from our assessment engagements. It is the risk mitigation plan teed up. I can't create the mitigation plan for you, but what I can do is bring everything together from that assessment to a point where, hey, you have it all in one place and you have a handful of columns that you've got to now make a decision. What am I going to do? That's where the plan comes into place. So that risk mitigation plan deliverable that we create it's incomplete unless our client goes in and says, okay, what I'm going to do about these things. So that's the risk mitigation plan. Let me jump in real quickly to assessing third parties. You've got that page on risk mitigation plan. There's a couple of slides there on mitigation plan. Assessing third parties. This is coming straight out of the regulation. It's talking about overseeing. Number 3, periodically assessing your service providers based on the risk they present and the continued adequacy of their safeguards. What that's saying is they should have the same safeguards in place that you do. And the HIPAA Security new proposed rule went way over and got really serious about it because all of the breaches that have happened, and you guys have seen this even in the auto industry, the breaches that are happening with third parties. So what we've done is we're working to finalize an approach to this where we can actually have questionnaires to go out to those vendors that don't have SOC reports, to those third parties, and ask some core questions. And one of those, what you're looking at right now, is the graph of the responses of what framework do you use for your risk assessment. So in our questionnaire that goes out to them, one of the question is, do you do a risk assessment? And then if they say yes, it goes into a sub questionnaire that says, hey, what framework do you use? The reason for that is when we dig down into this to this level, it's going to reveal this 37% that said other, that's probably not a good answer. Okay. It's probably the ones that think they're doing a risk assessment and they really aren't, because we know where the core frameworks are coming from. So this is meant to gather that information related to the third parties so that our client can then say, okay, I've got the majority of them, we're in good shape. Now let's look at this 37%, and you have the ability to look down at the detailed responses of those to then dig into that a bit and say, okay, wait a minute, what do you mean other? Because by the way, when they choose other in this, they have the option to actually input what that other is. So this is just one example of what that would look like. And then this is asking, hey, look, do you have a risk mitigation plan? Because the fact is that without the risk mitigation plan, it's not the full recipe. And these were just us going through and putting in, sample responses so we would have some graphs. Like I said, we're launching that, meant to be, once again, something that's inexpensive but really hits home. That approach will meet the new HIPAA Security Rule, proposed rule, which says that you have to verify. That they use the word verify. So the FTC is pretty strong. The new rule in HIPAA basically said you got to verify in writing. So this to me is a great way to get that accomplished for a low amount of effort, low amount of money, and you get the job done. And it also truly brings back valuable information, because if you got vendors that are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, this is going to reveal that. And you need to know that. It needs to be brought to your attention so that you can make some decisions on how do you go forward, because it's one of those things, is it really worth the risk to you to continue if they're not going to make some changes? Now, it doesn't mean you have to divorce that vendor immediately, but it is one of those things where, okay, look, vendor, it can't be like this. We need to have a plan where we're moving in the right direction so that this is not a problem for us. And that's exactly what's happening in the healthcare industry. So the final thing is the incident response plan. And they're very specific about the incident response plan. This is from the proposed rule that it's in writing. The proposed rule digs into about the basis for it. And this is a CPG, basic incident planning. What they're really trying to get is they're not trying to get any of these entities in these different industries to do some crazy amount of work. What they're really trying to do is to get them to think in a big way and whittle it down, to really kind of get the juices flowing of, okay, so what if an incident happened, what are all the things I really need to think about? And if you utilize, or if you look at some of these things that came from FEMA, you're going to look at some of it and go, yeah, well, that doesn't apply to us. No problem. Move on, right? But you're also going to see some things in there that you're going to go, wow, that really made me think about something. I didn't think about that. And that's what they're really trying to get you to do, as opposed to, well, I call my third party provider. That's not an incident response plan, right? It's not thinking through exactly what we're going to do. So that's what they're really asking for. And I put takeaway. It's not a one pager. It really is something that's going to take a little bit of effort and a little bit of work to go through. And in our engagements, we typically, what we're doing is giving a framework for that, or a template for that, and kind of pushing and getting the client to start on that. But it's not something that it's something they're going to have to actually work on and create themselves. All right, so takeaways, because we are just a few minutes over, and I appreciate y'all's patience. I'm very mindful of your time. You're not too small for the security incident, okay? Trust me, you're not too small. It's a recipe. You need all the ingredients. You can't just have one thing and ignore all the rest. Plan your work, then work your plan. And that's really comes down to that risk mitigation plan. Come up with a plan and then work that plan. And there again, there's what we've seen in the past is more leniency when someone has done it the right way and have come up with a plan that was a reasonable plan, and they've worked the plan, even if that while they were working the plan, they were falling short. I still believe that they will give grace when it comes to that stance. Don't waste your time and money with less than what is required. It's just leads to false sense of security and leads to regret when you realize time and money was wasted. So hopefully this was helpful. And again, I hate that we weren't able to bring Wade in to this call. Wade is we partner with VinSearch. Wade is a more technical side of things. And he's who we lean on when our clients are struggling with the technical aspects of it. He's also who we lean on when our clients are going, we just don't have the money. We're struggling here. Wade's group is a great group to look to say, hey, look, how are we doing with the solutions that we've got? Are we paying too much? Are we getting what we're paying for? Because I'll be honest with you, what I've seen out there, and in this, Wade's helped us in multiple industries, is basically the client have been working in an area for a long time, and the monies that they're paying for things now are not the going rate. And I say that because it could give, Wade's group can help. They can give some leverage so that as you go back to the contracts and say, hey, look, we've got to get these dollars down, it could give you some budget for some other areas to move you forward from a compliance standpoint. So Wade's been a great resource. Again, he's working with several of our clients in insurance, healthcare, and auto dealers right now, ongoing, to help them. So, but anyway, if you guys have questions, you have my contact information. I will post this out there after this is over. The video will, a notification will come to you. The video is available. And then, like I said, I'll make the resource of the PowerPoint and the annotated regulation available. So hopefully this was helpful. We appreciate you attending, and you guys have a great rest of your afternoon.